So my wife handed me this task the other day, which sounded simple enough. She said, "Hey, you just handle this one thing for me." And I thought, yeah, I got this. I'm a capable adult. But of course, the moment she said those words, the universe knew it had just given me the ultimate trap. I'm not exaggerating. It was like she had secretly planned a reality show called Watch Him Fail Spectacularly. I started out confidently thinking, okay, I'll just do the task exactly like she would. But that was my first mistake, because apparently doing something like she would requires understanding the entire psychology of a human being. And I just don't have that. I can microwave leftovers and handle traffic, but understanding why a Tupperware lid goes on at a 37-degree angle. Then, somewhere along the way, I got distracted. Maybe it was a dog. Maybe it was a commercial about furniture I'll never buy. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could multitask while juggling this one simple task. And naturally, distraction led to chaos. At one point, I looked around and realized I was 2 steps away from calling the fire department. They're smart, a plumber, and maybe the National Guard, just to cover all my bases. The funny thing is, I could feel her watching. You can always feel it when a wife is watching, because it's like the air changes suddenly. Every action feels like it's in slow motion, and every mistake is amplified by 400%. I knew I had already crossed the line from small mistake to historic disaster. But I had to keep going, because turning back now would be admitting defeat. And I'm too proud for that, which is part of the problem. So there I was, trying to fix what I had already broken, which, if you've never done it, is a very specific kind of insanity. It's only time in life when you realize that one wrong move can create a ripple effect that impacts everything else, including your dignity, your evening plans, and possibly your life insurance. But I kept going, because I thought, just maybe I can salvage this. And that's when the real comedy started, because the task was never just one thing. It had layers like an onion, and I was crying without even cutting it. By the time she walked back in the room, I had a masterpiece of disaster in front of me. I mean, it looked like something a toddler and a raccoon could have collaborated on while blindfolded. And I tried to act calm. I said, "Don't worry, it's under control." And she just gave me that look, the one that says, "I trusted you. Now the universe is laughing at me through you." And I realized in that moment, one task was never about the task. It was about testing me. I failed spectacularly. It all started when my wife asked me to do something that sounded impossibly simple. She didn't even raise her voice. She didn't sigh dramatically. She just handed me the task with that casual, almost invisible tone that somehow makes it feel like the fate of the universe rests on your ability to execute it correctly. I thought, this is nothing. I've got this. I mean, she literally said, "Can you just take care of this for me?" Those words echoed in my head like a challenge I wasn't ready for. My ego didn't care. I pictured myself finishing it quickly, maybe even getting a little smile of approval, maybe even bragging later about how efficiently I handled something so small, like I just won an Olympic medal in domestic life. Sounded perfect. At first glance, really did seem like one of those tasks you could do with your eyes closed, like watering a plant or putting the dishes in the dishwasher. Something that required minimal thought and maximum success rate. But of course, as soon as you think something is simple, the universe laughs at you. There's always a hidden trap in anything labeled simple. And it's usually specifically designed to make you feel simultaneously incompetent and ridiculous, ideally in front of a spouse who's just quietly observing from the corner of the room. I had walked into that trap without even noticing, because confidence feels like armor, when the armor is made entirely of delusion and poor decision-making. So, accepted the mission with the full belief that I was capable. I mean, I'd accomplished other things before, simple things, everyday things, but apparently this task was different. There was no warning label, no manual, no tiny print that said, warning, this task may cause catastrophic embarrassment if attempted by an adult male. I felt prepared, I felt smart, I felt slightly heroic. Kind of heroic that doesn't involve saving lives, just surviving the quiet judgment of someone who knows what they're doing and has zero patience for improvisation. Smart. That's when I realized the beauty of the setup. There was absolutely nothing threatening about it. Everything that could go wrong was already quietly lining up, waiting for me to step into the perfect storm without realizing it. I started by analyzing the task like I was some kind of strategist. I thought about how to optimize my approach, how to do it efficiently, how to multitask, and maybe even make it look effortless. But efficiency is a trap, especially when you're a man who thinks he's a professional problem solver in a domestic setting. I was already imagining the applause in my head, the quiet nod of approval, the self-satisfaction of someone who had completed the simplest assignment of their life flawlessly. Somewhere in that planning stage, I didn't notice the first little warning signs, the tiny hints that maybe, just maybe, the task was slightly more complicated than it appeared. It was innocent, harmless, like walking into a room with a banana on the floor and thinking, I can handle this. That banana, of course, is slippery, and it's positioned exactly where the universe wants you to fall. And that's exactly what happened next. Once I accepted the task, I immediately felt this surge of confidence, smart, the kind that makes you think you're a superhero in your own living room. I mean, I'd handled plenty of things before, right? I've driven in traffic, cooked things that didn't explode. I once even fixed a leaky faucet without flooding the entire house. How hard could this one little assignment really be? That's the trick of overconfidence. It makes you blind to the small warnings, the subtle signs that you might not actually know what you're doing. I was walking into this situation thinking I was some kind of domestic ninja, ready to complete the mission with precision and skill. The naivety is where it gets interesting, because I genuinely believed I had a plan. I had thought through every step, or at least I thought I had. There was a point where I paused and considered asking for clarification, but my pride got in the way. No, I thought asking questions now would ruin the illusion of competence. I was convinced I could intuitively understand what needed to be done. This is classic Nate Bargatze-style thinking. The more confident you are, the more likely it is that you're walking straight into chaos. And I was strutting toward it like it was a red carpet. I began the task with extreme enthusiasm, too much energy, really, which is part of the problem. Overconfidence makes you think speed equals skill, but in reality, it's usually the opposite. I was moving fast, taking shortcuts, trying to be clever, thinking, I'll get this done so perfectly, she'll wonder why she even needed to ask me in the first place. But cleverness is dangerous when combined with naivety. It's like giving a toddler a power drill. Sure, it sounds fun, but the results are unpredictable. It's only a matter of time before something gets broken, or worse, the toddler gets hurt. Somewhere in the middle of the task, I started noticing tiny warning signs that maybe I had overestimated my abilities. Nothing catastrophic yet, Just small things like a lid that wouldn't fit properly or an object that refused to stay in place. That's the point where overconfidence is the cruelest. It convinces you to ignore the little alarms because in your head, I'm fine, I'm perfectly fine, everything is under control. Meanwhile, reality is silently chuckling at your audacity. It's like stepping onto a stage thinking you're the headliner, but the microphone is broken, the lights are blinding, the audience has no idea who you are. I also tried to multitask while doing this simple thing because overconfidence makes you believe you can handle more than is humanly possible. I was juggling multiple steps at once. If I do this, and this, I'll finish twice as fast. And that's when things started to go sideways. Not catastrophically yet, but the universe had begun its slow, methodical setup of the chaos that was about to unfold. The confidence that once felt heroic began to feel like walking across thin ice with a blindfold on, except I didn't even notice the ice, or that I was blindfolded, or that I had no idea what a hole in ice could do to me. The funniest part, I was genuinely proud of myself in that moment, because pride has a way of blinding you to the obvious. I looked around and thought, I'm handling this perfectly. But somewhere, just out of sight, disaster was already quietly lining up its dominoes, waiting for that exact moment when I was least prepared to stop it. So I was in the middle of what I thought was a simple task, moving confidently, multitasking like a domestic superhero, when the first distraction hit, and it wasn't a dramatic distraction, it was subtle. Like the dog walking by, staring at me as if judging my every move. Now, normally I love my dog, but in that moment, he was an unspoken critic, silently saying, "You're gonna ruin this, aren't you?" And I thought, no, I've got this, ignore the dog. But ignoring him was my first mistake because distraction has a sneaky way of multiplying, especially when combined with overconfidence. Then, of course, the phone buzzed. Not a big deal, right? Just a notification. But you know how notifications work. They're like sirens for disaster when your confidence is already fragile. I thought, just check this quickly. And just like that, 2 minutes became 10, and my focus was gone. Suddenly, I realized I had forgotten where I left part of the task, which, if you think about it, is hilarious. Hadn't even finished step 1, and step 2 is already planning its own escape route. As if that wasn't enough, I started thinking about other things I could do while finishing this one task. It seemed efficient at the time. I thought, I'll just handle this little thing and also fix the cabinet door while I'm at it. Efficiency is a trap, because what really happened was that I had split my brain into 3 pieces, each one thinking it was handling a separate part of the problem, and none of them were communicating. It was like my thoughts formed a tiny dysfunctional office where every employee was on a different floor and nobody answered emails. The escalation began. Little things I could have ignored before now started behaving like tiny explosives. Lid wouldn't snap on, a paper slipped off the counter, the dog looked guilty for no reason. And I realized, too late, that distraction had turned every step of the task into a hazard course. But I couldn't stop, because stopping meant admitting failure. And I wasn't ready for that. Kept moving forward like a soldier in a slow motion disaster movie, each action compounding the chaos I had created without even noticing. And here's the thing about distraction. In these situations, it doesn't just affect the task at hand. It affects your confidence, your pride, and the way you perceive reality. I started imagining that I could do everything perfectly, but in reality, I was just stacking errors on top of errors. creating a tower of mistakes that would inevitably collapse. Yet for some reason, I convinced myself I was still in control. That's the funniest part. You're standing in the middle of a slowly growing catastrophe, feeling like you're just doing your job, when in fact, you're building a monument to your own overconfidence. At one point, I looked around and realized that nothing in that room was where it was supposed to be. The simplest objects seemed to have shifted position deliberately, like the universe was playing a prank on me. And the dog, and they're smart, who had been silently judging the whole time, was now actively involved, stepping into my path at every turn, adding to the chaos. I had reached a level of distraction where it was no longer about completing the task. It was about surviving the process without completely losing my mind. At some point, I realized I wasn't just dealing with the task itself. There was an invisible audience in the room. It was the kind of audience that doesn't applaud or give hints. It just watches. You can feel it without seeing it. That's the thing about being a husband doing something he thinks is simple. You know she's watching, and suddenly every movement, every choice, every tiny misstep becomes a performance under a microscope. I could feel her eyes like they were lasers, scanning every detail, calculating every possible mistake. I hadn't even realized that in my confidence I had signed up for this level of scrutiny. Invisible audience has this magical way of making your brain second guess itself. 1 second, you're perfectly certain you're handling something correctly, and the next second, a tiny thought creeps in. Wait, is that how she would do it? That's the beginning of panic disguised as overthinking. Here's the worst part. You can't ask questions. You can't say, hey, am I doing this right? Because the act of asking confirms that you don't know what you're doing. So you pretend like you're a professional, a master of the task, even though inside your confidence is already wobbling like a kid on a seesaw. Then comes the pressure, that invisible weight that makes every step slower, every movement more deliberate, every decision feel monumental. I started noticing that even the smallest actions had consequences I hadn't considered. Picking up a bowl became an event. Putting something on the counter felt like a decision that would either make or break the rest of the day. Invisible audience doesn't scream or shout. It just waits patiently while you embarrass yourself. The only thing worse than messing up is realizing that they're silently judging every single second. I also noticed that my attempts to be smooth and competent were failing spectacularly. Things I thought would be easy now seem like advanced puzzles. And every time I paused, she was still there, silently watching. In my head, I imagined her thoughts. Are you sure you know what you're doing? That's when you start narrating your own actions just to feel sane, like, okay, I've got this step 1, step 2, not dropping anything, yes, perfect, and you end up sounding like a commentator for a sport that's entirely new and incredibly dangerous. The invisible audience doesn't just make you self-conscious. It makes you overcompensate. I found myself trying things that were unnecessary, doing extra steps, double, checking things that didn't need checking, all because I knew she was watching. Every small success felt like a victory parade, but every minor mistake was magnified, stretched, and projected onto this imaginary screen in front of me, making it feel like I was failing not just the task, but life itself. Then, of course, the creeping suspicion that even if you succeed, she already knows the disaster waiting to happen. She can see the dominoes lined up perfectly for the moment you least expect it. That's when the invisible audience becomes the funniest, cruelest part. of the story you're alone, but not alone. Trying to perform, trying to manage a disaster you haven't fully created yet. The suspense of being watched turns the mundane into a spectacle you never signed up for. By the time I realized things were going sideways, it was already too late to turn back. What started as a simple step task had snowballed into a full-blown compounded disaster. Each attempt to fix one small problem only created another one. It's the kind of situation where you think, I just correct this tiny thing, everything will be fine. You discover that correcting the tiny thing means shaking a different domino that was quietly wobbling in the background. Didn't even know how many dominoes there were. And at that point, I was too afraid to ask. I started noticing that every object in the room had a mind of its own. A bowl wouldn't sit straight. Towel fell in exactly the wrong spot. Even the dog, who had been quietly observing before, seemed to decide, I'm going to participate now, stepping on corners of things that I thought were stable. It was as if the universe had hired an army of tiny pranksters specifically to make this task impossible for me. The more I tried to organize, the worse it got. Every effort I made to restore order seemed to trigger some new level of chaos I didn't know existed. And here's the real kicker. The disasters weren't just random. They were perfectly timed to maximize embarrassment. A lid would slip just as I was about to put it on, spilling its contents in a way that looked intentional, like I was attempting performance art. A drawer would stick at the exact second I needed it to open smoothly. They're smart. Even the sound of the phone buzzing from earlier seemed to echo across the room like it was mocking me. It's amazing how quickly one small mistake can multiply exponentially when mixed with overconfidence and distraction. The compounded nature of the disaster also introduced a strange rhythm. There's a beat to it, almost musical, like the universe is conducting a symphony of chaos. First, a small mistake, then a bigger one, then something completely unexpected. I had to move carefully, but moving carefully meant I had more time to notice new problems. Noticing new problems only made me panic slightly, which in turn made me move faster, which caused more problems. It's a cycle, and cycles are fun to watch if you're not the one trapped in them. By this point, I had forgotten what the original task was even supposed to look like. I was improvising, but improvisation under pressure is never as smooth as it looks in the movies. I was improvising like a clown juggling chainsaws while blindfolded, confident enough to think I could do it, but clearly lacking the necessary skills or awareness. And somehow, the dog was still part of it, walking around my feet, an unpredictable element to every movement I made. I swear the dog had a strategy, like it knew exactly how to maximize the comedic effect of my failure. Even the air in the room felt different. It was thick with tension and anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath to see how far this chain reaction would go. Every small sound, tap of a dish, scrape of a cabinet, shuffle of a foot felt amplified like the soundtrack of impending doom. And I was stuck in the middle of it, desperately trying to stay one step ahead, which of course meant I was actually 2 steps behind at all times. Every solution I attempted became part of the problem. Every correction created another ripple. The room had transformed from an ordinary living space into a stage for a meticulously orchestrated disaster performance. After the compounded disaster had reached its peak, I stood there in the middle of the room, surveying the chaos I had created, and I realized something very important. I was the architect of my own downfall. Every single thing that had gone wrong could be traced back to me. My overconfidence, my distraction, my refusal to ask questions, my insistence on multitasking. And yet, there was a part of me that was still trying to convince myself I had done a good job. That's the thing about being self-aware in the middle of a disaster. You know you're failing, but you're still desperately trying to find a victory, even if it's only in your head. I started narrating my own actions out loud, like some sort of commentary for an audience that didn't exist, and it was helpful in the weirdest way. I said things like, okay, here's where it goes no. Wait, not there, maybe there. Oh no, that's worse. And somehow, saying it out loud made the situation feel a little less catastrophic, at least momentarily. I could imagine someone watching me and thinking, well, at least he's aware, he's failing, which is true. But awareness doesn't prevent disasters. It just gives you better jokes later. And that's exactly what happened. The more aware I became of my incompetence, the funnier the situation got, at least in a storytelling sense. Then I started thinking about patterns. Every disaster had followed a rhythm, a sequence, a sort of cosmic choreography that I had unknowingly participated in. The universe had a plan, involved me looking heroic for about 3 seconds before reality reminded me that I was not, in fact, heroic. I found myself analyzing my own mistakes as if I were giving a TED Talk on how to fail spectacularly while trying to help. The irony was delicious. I had set out to do one small simple thing, and in the process, I had created a story so intricate, so layered, so perfectly chaotic, that it could be a comedy sketch in itself. I also noticed something about timing. Timing is everything in comedy, and apparently, disaster works the same way. Every small failure had arrived at precisely the right moment to maximize embarrassment. A dropped item here, a spilled liquid there, a dog wandering through the scene like an accomplice. All of it had a rhythm, and I was unwittingly playing along, improvising my lines and actions in real time. It was almost like the room had a script. I was the improv actor fumbling through every cue, turning small mistakes into a symphony of calamity. There's a strange kind of pride that comes from surviving a situation like this. Even if survival is measured only in keeping your dignity partially intact, I had learned something fundamental about human nature, overconfidence, and the unpredictability of even the simplest tasks. I realized that sometimes the comedy isn't just in what happens. It's in your understanding of what happened and how utterly incapable you were of preventing it. That self-awareness is like gold for storytelling. It turns humiliation into entertainment and failure into narrative tension. Even as I stood there surveying the wreckage, I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. Each misstep, each distraction, each compounded mistake had led to a moment that was uniquely mine. And the thought occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, the one thing I had accomplished perfectly was creating a story that people would laugh at, relate to, and maybe secretly see themselves in. And just when I thought I had processed it all, the dog nudged a precariously balanced object. I realized the chaos was far from over.